I am the real young master who was taken back by the wealthy Ito family. The system assigned me a task: drive the fake young master out of the house. Sure enough, the moment I stepped into the house, my biological mother shielded the fake young master behind her and said, "Although you are my biological son, Makoto has been with us for 20 years. We've long treated him as our own child. We can't live without him." The system shouted loudly, "Quick, smash a glass, yell at them for playing favorites." However, what no one expected was that I nodded and agreed. That's understandable. 20 years of shared memories versus 20 years of biological genetics. A rational choice would naturally lean toward memory. Emotions are accumulated assets. Genes are merely initial parameters. My biological mother was stunned. My fiancée, Willow, threw a bank card in front of me and sneered. "You broke loser. Take the money and get lost. Stop clinging to me." The system roared in anger. "Have some self-respect even if you're broke. Snap the card in half. Tear her apart. Tell her, don't underestimate a poor young man. Fortunes rise and fall." But in the next second, I picked up the card, checked the signature on the back, and said, "Reasonable enough. A union without emotional foundation is an inefficient partnership. Furthermore, the other party has voluntarily paid liquidated damages. A fine example of contractual integrity." My fiancé froze. The system glitched in confusion. "Host, I'm begging you. Can you go just a little crazy? The storyline is about to collapse." I replied. "My behavioral pattern conforms to the rational actor model. It's your script that's excessively melodramatic." Chapter 1. In the living room of the Ito family's old residence, the central air conditioning hummed quietly as it pumped out cool air. Yet I could still catch a faint, almost imperceptible scent of sanctimonious self-righteousness in the atmosphere. My biological mother in the strict bloodline sense, Ms. Sandra, was at this very moment shielding behind her the fake young master who had occupied 20 years of my life, Makoto Ito. Makoto's face was ashen, his lips pale, his body trembling slightly, like the last flicker of a candle in the wind, ready to be snuffed out at any second. Sandra wept as she looked at me with a gaze tangled in guilt and distance. She said, "George, blood ties can't be severed, but Makoto has lived with us for 20 years. Every little moment is carved into our hearts. We can't abandon him. I hope you can understand your mother's difficulty." Standing to the side, Ito father Paul Ito cleared his throat. He didn't voice any objection, which counted as tacit approval. The system in my mind instantly went into overdrive. "Host, you're going to swallow this. Get up, point at their noses and call them blind and heartless. Flip the table, kick over the chairs, tell them that closeness and distance matter. You're the rightful heir." The electronic voice of the system buzzed so loudly that my temples throbbed. I raised a hand and pressed my brow. Under the tense and scrutinizing gazes of the three members of the Ito family, I calmly nodded. I said, "I understand completely." Makoto, who had just been putting on a pitiful act, froze on the spot. He looked at me in confusion, clearly not expecting my reaction to be so mild. Sandra was also stunned. You don't resent your mother." I walked over to a single sofa and sat down, relaxed, as if attending a routine project meeting. I said, "This is entirely logical. Between 20 years of day and night companionship and a biological connection in the pure bloodline sense, if I put myself in your position, I would choose the former as well. Blood is a probabilistic natural bond, while emotions are sunk costs verified over time. When making decisions, the latter carries more weight." I pointed at the watch on Makoto's wrist, then gestured to the sleeves of my own shirt, washed to a faded white. "You've invested 20 years of emotional and material resources into him. That's equivalent to operating a mature project that has already entered a stable return phase. Now you're suddenly being asked to switch to an initial stage project. Path dependence and switching costs are inevitable. This is basic investment theory." "I understand." The living room fell into an eerie silence. Sandra's expression looked as though she had swallowed a walnut whole, shell and all. She seemed to want to argue, yet found herself unable to counter my phrasing. The system let out a despairing electronic buzz in my head. "Host, what nonsense are you spouting? You're supposed to fight, to seize, to stage a comeback." I ignored the system and turned to Makoto instead, my tone even. "Please, continue. Don't mind me. I've only just taken over this family project. I'm still familiarizing myself with the environment and procedures." Chapter 2. Makoto was undoubtedly an experienced strategic player. After a brief moment of shock, he swiftly adjusted his tactics. He stepped around Sandra and walked up to me with an apologetic expression, lowering himself deliberately as he extended his hand, as if to shake mine. With a conciliatory smile, he said, "Brother, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I took everything that should have belonged to you. If you're unhappy, I can leave." In a conventional storyline, this would be the moment for me to rebuke him sharply or angrily shove his hand away, thereby cementing the accusation that I was narrow-minded. The system immediately began clamoring again. Perfect chance. Expose him. Tell him to get out right now. I looked at the hand Makoto had extended in supposed friendship. Instead of taking it, I pulled out a bottle of hand sanitizer and squeezed some onto my own palm. I said, "Don't put it that way. The property rights to this residence belong to Mr. Ito and Mother. From the perspective of property law, we are both temporary occupants here. There is no legal basis for concepts like taking or giving up." As I rubbed the sanitizer between my hands, I continued in the tone of someone analyzing a case study. "Moreover, where would you go if you left? You do not own independent real estate under your name. You lack sufficient social survival skills and a stable source of income. Renting would expose you to market risks and cost pressures, while staying in hotels is not a long-term solution. As a rational economic actor, remaining here maximizes your current utility. If I were in your position, I would make the same decision." Makoto's outstretched hand froze midair. His carefully designed tactic, retreating in order to advance, staging a self-sacrificing plea to evoke sympathy, was completely blocked by my calm dissection grounded in practical interests. The tragic drama of sacrificing himself for the sake of family was, in my framing, reduced to a pragmatic calculation for survival. Paul could no longer endure it. In a deep voice, he said, "George, watch how you speak. Makoto is your younger brother." "What do you mean, leave? This will always be his home." I immediately nodded, complying as smoothly as a subordinate receiving a clear directive. I said, "Understood, Mr. Ito. I comprehend that Makoto holds de facto permanent residency here. In that case, may I ask where my temporary workstation, no, my temporary room, has been arranged?" The formal Mr. Ito made Paul's brows knit together, his expression turning unpleasant. He said, "Have Butler Wu take you to the guest room." Chapter 3. Butler Wu was a stern-looking middle-aged man. The way he looked at me carried a barely perceptible scrutiny, and a trace of condescension. Clearly, within this house, the direction of public sentiment was unmistakable. He led me to a room at the very end of the third-floor corridor. He said, "Young master, every room in this residence serves a specific purpose. Young Master Ito keeps his leisure and daily living spaces separate, so he occupies 2 adjacent rooms. I'm afraid you'll have to make do here for the time being." The room faced north. The window was narrow, the lighting dim. There was only a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a chair. There wasn't even a desk. By contrast, when we passed Makoto's suite, I caught a glimpse of bright floor-to-ceiling windows, a private sitting area, and an entire wall lined with books and curated ornaments. The system crackled angrily in my mind. "This is outrageous. It's not even as good as a proper guest room. Host, go. Pick the lock to his suite and move in." However, after surveying the room, I nodded with measured approval. I said, "Not bad. A north-facing room stays cool in summer, reducing air conditioning energy consumption. The compact space is easy to clean and organize. Located at the end of the corridor, it experiences minimal foot traffic, offering better privacy. Suitable for focused thinking." The prepared speech Butler Wu had likely rehearsed landed like a punch thrown into thin air, no impact whatsoever. He stared at me in disbelief. "Young master, you don't feel wronged." I set down my simple luggage bag and took out my laptop and external hard drive. Calmly, I replied, "What is there to feel wronged about? I am an external hire, airdropped in without prior contribution or seniority. Being allocated an independent resting space is already preferential treatment. Should I be expecting immediate placement in a core executive office?" I looked at Butler Wu earnestly and added, "Also, how is the Wi-Fi coverage in this house? What's the password? I require a stable internet connection to handle remote work." The corner of Butler Wu's mouth twitched. In the end, he recited a string of characters, then withdrew with an expression difficult to describe. I closed the door. The system was still chattering. "Where's your backbone? They're trampling on your dignity." I powered on my laptop, connected to the Wi-Fi, and quickly skimmed the futures market trends and pending tasks on several remote collaboration platforms. I said, "System, you are overly emotional. Dignity is an intrinsic value. It is not diminished by external conditions. However, if I were to engage in destructive behavior out of anger, it would result in tangible economic loss. My current liquid funds amount to only 327 yuan and 40 cents. I cannot afford any fines or compensation." Chapter 4. By dinner time, the atmosphere at the long dining table was so stagnant that even the food felt hard to swallow. In an effort to display maternal affection, Sandra kept serving Makoto. "Makoto, you've gotten thinner lately. Eat more meat. No matter how busy you are, you can't skip meals." Makoto glanced at me, then shrugged as if helpless, smiling. "Thanks, Mom. You care about me the most. You should eat more too." Paul chimed in from time to time, asking about Makoto's work and daily routine. The 3 of them formed a harmonious family portrait. While I felt like an outsider who had wandered into a private banquet, the system shrieked, "Flip the table, now." Dump that bowl of soup over Makoto's head. I kept my head down and focused on eating. My pace wasn't slow, but my movements were quiet and disciplined. Years of living independently and working under high intensity had trained me to complete the biological necessity of eating efficiently. Sandra seemed to finally notice something amiss. She picked up a portion of stir-fried asparagus and placed it into my bowl. "George, have some vegetables too. Don't just eat rice." The asparagus dish had barely been touched since it was served. Makoto had taken one bite and discreetly spat it out earlier. I looked at the asparagus in my bowl but didn't move my chopsticks. Makoto immediately smiled and said, "Brother, you don't like this. I suppose that makes sense. With the kind of living conditions you had before, you probably didn't get to eat high-end vegetables like this. It's normal if you're not used to it." The system exploded indignantly. "He's mocking you, saying a wild boar can't appreciate fine grain. Smash the plate. Stuff all the food into his smug mouth." I set down my chopsticks and dabbed the corner of my mouth with a napkin. "It's not that I dislike it," I said evenly. "I've finished my meal." I stood up and gave a slight nod toward Paul and Sandra. "Thank you for the hospitality. The dishes were well balanced. If there are no further matters, I'll return to my room to handle some online work." Paul blinked. "Work? You just came home. Shouldn't you spend more time with your family? Get familiar." I glanced at my watch. It is 8:10 p.m., which falls within my scheduled personal work hours. Moreover, judging by your current exchange, the atmosphere is quite harmonious. My abrupt participation might disrupt the established dynamic. As a newly added member, maintaining appropriate boundaries is a matter of basic courtesy. With that, I turned and left the table, leaving the three of them staring at one another. Faintly, I heard Sandra mutter under her breath, "Why does this child feel like a machine running on preset programming?" Not a trace of warmth. The corner of my lips shifted almost imperceptibly. Warmth. That requires sustained emotional energy input. In the script you've already written, I am merely a newly inserted variable. Discussing heat is a luxury. Maintaining stable operation is the priority. Chapter 5. Early the next morning, an expected visitor arrived at the old residence of the Ito family. Willow, Makoto's fiancée, and theoretically the woman who had originally been betrothed to me. The woman's outward conditions were indeed outstanding: graceful figure, refined temperament. Unfortunately, her eyes didn't look particularly intelligent. The moment she stepped into the living room, she ran into me just as I was about to head out. Open parenthesis. In reality, I was going to the municipal library to look up materials and enjoy the free air conditioning. Close parenthesis. Without a word, Willow pulled a bank card from her handbag and casually tossed it at my feet. The card hit the floor with a soft sound. She said, "There's $3 million in that account. Password 6/8. Take the money and disappear. I'm allergic to clueless, small-town simps like you." She lifted her chin slightly, her tone dripping with disdain. Makoto stood at the staircase landing, the corner of his lips curling upward, satisfaction flashing in his eyes. The system grew so agitated its pitch shifted. "Have some self-respect even if you're broke. Snap the card in half. Tear her apart. Tell her, don't underestimate a poor young man. Fortunes rise and fall." I bent down and picked up the bank card. I examined the card details, the issuing bank's logo, and silently memorized the card number. Then I took a portable receipt folder and a pen from the side pocket of my canvas bag. "Miss Liu, one moment please," I wrote quickly, tore off one copy, and handed it to Willow. She accepted it reflexively, glanced down, and froze completely. "What is this?" she asked. "A receipt acknowledgement." I offered a professional smile. "Given that you have voluntarily paid compensation for the dissolution of our engagement, it is necessary to formalize the procedure to prevent any unnecessary financial disputes in the future. It states that I, George, have received from Ms. Willow the sum of 3 million yuan as compensation for terminating the engagement. From this point forward, the engagement is automatically dissolved, payment settled in full, and neither party shall pursue further claims." Willow stared at me as if I were some rare organism. You're actually accepting it?" "Of course," I replied, carefully placing the bank card into my inner pocket. "This is entirely reasonable. An engagement lacking emotional foundation is an inefficient contract. Termination constitutes a Pareto improvement. Moreover, the initiating party has voluntarily provided financial compensation, reducing my transaction costs. That qualifies you as a model cooperative counterpart." I even added considerately, "Would you like me to draft a formal disclaimer, or issue a brief joint announcement through mutually recognized channels to clarify matters publicly?" Willow's face flushed crimson, then shifted toward green. Every humiliating line she had prepared lost all function in the face of my receipt. Chapter 6. With 3 million yuan in hand, my financial pressure was immediately alleviated. However, I did not engage in irrational spending as the system had anticipated. Instead, I swiftly divided the sum into 3 portions, one allocated to highly liquid, conservative funds, one reserved as emergency capital, and the remaining portion invested in 2 small-cap technology stocks I had been monitoring for their growth potential. That evening, when I returned to the Ito residence, The atmosphere was even more oppressive than the day before. Paul and Sandra sat rigidly on the sofa. Makoto stood to the side, head lowered, silent. The moment I stepped inside, Paul slammed his teacup down heavily on the coffee table. "George, have you no shame at all? Begging money from Willow of all people." Makoto let out a sigh, his tone thick with disappointed righteousness. "Brother, a gentleman does not accept alms thrown at him, no matter how poor one is. One must not lose ambition. Did you only come back home for money? If you're short on cash, you could have told me. My savings, my allowance, I could lend you some. Why did you have to do this?" The system roared. "Hit back. Tell them they're playing both saint and sinner at the same time." I changed into my indoor slippers, walked into the living room, and took out a rolled certificate from my document folder. I had picked it up from a custom print shop earlier that afternoon. It was imitation parchment, tied with a deep blue ribbon. When unrolled, it displayed elegant handwritten script. "Sincere appreciation for assuming partner responsibilities. Wishing you a harmonious union." I presented the certificate to Makoto with both hands. "Brother," I said calmly, "I accepted that money without hesitation. Please understand it this way, the original rights to this engagement belong to me. Now, through Miss Lu's payment, those rights have been transferred and assumed by you. The 3 million yuan may be regarded as consideration for the transfer of said rights. In the marketplace, even transferring a storefront requires a fee, let alone a premium asset like Miss Lu." Makoto stared at the rolled certificate, neither taking it nor refusing it, his face dark as charcoal. Paul gritted his teeth. You're treating marriage like an equity transaction." "From an economic perspective," I replied evenly, "marriage indeed contains significant elements of property rights and partnership. Since a price has been offered, if I, as the party relinquishing the rights, were to refuse payment, I would distort the market signal and devalue the asset." I looked at Makoto and said with admiration, "Little brother, in the old days, wealthy patrons had to pay a fortune to buy a courtesan's freedom, a one-time cost in exchange for long-term companionship. Yet you didn't spend a single cent and still had someone free themselves for you. How could anyone not admire that?" Makoto's fury ignited. He slammed his palm onto the table with a sharp crack. His fist rose, then fell. Unable to respond, he turned and stormed off. Sandra pointed at me, her finger trembling. You're going to anger me to death." I looked at her, genuinely puzzled. "Mom, I'm safeguarding my brother's product valuation from depreciation." Chapter 7. For reasons unknown, Sandra announced that over the weekend she would take us to a downtown shopping mall to buy clothes. I told her there was no need. I could purchase my own. She feigned irritation and insisted on bringing me along, saying that she had bought Makoto's clothes since he was little, and I would not be an exception. However, although it was nominally a trip to shop for me, the moment we entered the mall, Sandra and Makoto headed straight for the luxury flagship counters. "Makoto, this casual set really suits your style. Go try it on." "Makoto, look how well these trousers match, so elegant." Makoto tried on one outfit after another, and Sandra praised him each time. "My son is so handsome." I followed behind quietly, like a silent accompanying assistant. The system muttered, "Host, grab the card, max it out, make them see who the true bloodline heir is." I calmly watched Sandra sign receipt after receipt, feeling no emotional fluctuation. When Makoto tried on a bright orange suit, I even stepped forward voluntarily. "The color saturation is too high," I said. "It may make your complexion appear uneven. I suggest the light oat-colored one beside it. A neutral tone will look more relaxed and refined." Makoto gave a cold laugh. "What scheme are you plotting now?" "This is for the sake of maintaining the overall image of the Ito family," I replied seriously. "Young Master Ito represents the face of our family. Your sartorial taste directly influences external evaluations of the Ito family's wealth and standing. As a member of the Ito household, I have a responsibility to offer optimization suggestions." Makoto nodded repeatedly, chin raised. That's right. He changed into the light oat-colored suit. The effect was remarkable. Even the sales associate smiled and said, "Sir, your advice is very professional." Sandra looked at Makoto's refreshed appearance. She had likely intended to belittle me deliberately, but instead, a trace of discomfort surfaced in her expression. Casually, she picked up a shirt from a pile of discounted items on a nearby promotional table and handed it to me. "George, what do you think of this one?" It was an off-season piece, dull in color and average in material. The system shouted, "Throw it back. Tell her you're above this." I accepted the shirt, felt the fabric, and checked the care label. "No need to try it on," I said. "A basic design, versatile polyester fabric, easy to machine wash and maintain, with decent durability, suitable for daily wear or non-formal occasions." "Thank you, Mom. It's practical." Not only did I show no dissatisfaction, I thanked her sincerely. Sandra's hand remained suspended in midair, her expression complicated and difficult to decipher. Guilt is a peculiar emotion. The more you resist, The more the other party believes you are insatiable, the more reasonable and accommodating you are, the more they begin to question themselves. At that moment, Sandra had clearly fallen into a quiet spiral of self-doubt. Chapter 8. After returning to the Ito family home, Makoto Ito once again looked displeased, as if I had taught him a lesson today, open parenthesis, although I had no such intention, close parenthesis. In the living room, he deliberately, accidentally, knocked one of Sandra's treasured antique teacups from a set onto the floor. The porcelain shattered with a crisp, piercing sound. Immediately afterward, he staggered back 2 steps and collapsed dramatically to the ground. Pointing at me, he exclaimed, "Brother, why did you kick me?" At the time, I had been standing by the window checking messages on my phone, separated from him by the length of a long sofa. Sandra and Paul rushed over at the sound, taking in the scattered porcelain shards, and Makoto sprawled on the floor. Makoto pointed at me again, his tone restrained as if suppressing grievance. Brother said he couldn't stand how recklessly I spent money and wanted to teach me a lesson. He kicked me and knocked over Mom's teacup. Such a rudimentary frame-up tactic was practically an insult to my capacity for logic. Paul glared at me. "George, how can you be so ill-mannered?" The system shouted, "Defend yourself. Tell them you were miles away from him." I put away my phone and let out a sigh. Then, without the slightest hurry, I dialed the internal number for the Property Management Security Center, open parenthesis. I memorized the number when I came in, close parenthesis. I said, "Hello. This is the main living room of the Ito residence. A property damage incident has occurred here, suspected to be intentional destruction. The item involved is of relatively high value, and the statements of those present are inconsistent. Please dispatch 2 security officers immediately to secure the scene, and I suggest contacting the police to collect evidence and mediate." The entire family froze. Makoto choked on his words. "Why, you called security, and you're reporting this to the police?" I nodded. The most efficient way to resolve a dispute is to introduce an authoritative third party. Internal quarrels easily become emotional and make it difficult to assign responsibility. Security personnel can temporarily isolate the scene, and the police can conduct a preliminary inspection and take statements through technical means, open parenthesis. For example, checking whether there are additional surveillance angles, close parenthesis, or by examining inconsistencies in individual accounts. It is easier to approach the truth. Paul stepped forward to stop me. "Nonsense. Dragging a family matter outside, what kind of image is that?" I shifted slightly aside. "Dad, property damage involves property law. If I am responsible, I will bear the compensation. If my younger brother caused it, whether accidentally or intentionally, that must also be clarified. False accusations may likewise entail legal liability before the facts are established. Preserving the scene and seeking impartial adjudication is the correct procedure." Makoto's face turned deathly pale. He had only intended for me to be scolded. He had never imagined it escalating to police involvement and an official record. Chapter 9. Security personnel arrived swiftly, followed shortly by the local patrol officer they had contacted. Upon seeing the scene inside the residence, the officer looked somewhat exasperated. "Who requested police assistance?" I raised my hand. "I did." I pointed to the porcelain shards on the floor. "Mr. Makoto here has accused me of deliberately kicking him and causing property damage. I deny this accusation. I suggest that the police record the positional relationships of all individuals present and attempt to gather additional evidence, such as alternative surveillance angles within the residence, or whether any domestic staff passed by at the time and witnessed the incident." Paul's expression darkened. Forcing a smile, he said to the officer, "It's a misunderstanding. Just kids fooling around and not paying attention. We can handle it ourselves." The officer replied sternly, "Filing a false report or wasting police resources is inappropriate." "What exactly happened? Clarify." Makoto shrank behind Paul, too frightened to speak. I maintained an even tone. "If it is confirmed to be a misunderstanding, may it be understood that Mr. Makoto withdraws his accusation against me and acknowledges that he made an erroneous identification under impaired judgment." Makoto gritted his teeth and glared at me. In the end, he gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was me. I lost my balance and knocked it over. I hit my head and thought it was my brother." The officer gave Paul and Sandra a brief lecture, emphasizing the importance of proper communication within the family and advising against escalating minor conflicts. After the police and security personnel left, Paul collapsed back onto the sofa, looking utterly drained. He pointed at me, his finger trembling. You unfilial son. Must you turn this house upside down?" I spread my hands, expressionless. "Dad, I'm helping my brother. If the habit of casually framing others is not corrected early, it may cause more severe credibility crises, or even legal risks, in future social interactions or business collaborations. I'm preventing larger problems before they arise. Use magic to defeat magic. Use process to restrain emotion." As I looked at the 3 members of the Ito family, their expressions as bitter as if they had swallowed a mouthful of unsweetened medicine, I experienced a distinct sense of efficient satisfaction. Chapter 10. After the police incident, a subtle sense of wariness developed among the 3 members of the Ito family toward me. They no longer provoked me easily. Whenever I appeared, the atmosphere would turn faintly cautious. But that did not mean hostilities had ceased. Makoto's birthday banquet was approaching. It was a major item on the Ito family's social calendar. Many prominent figures in the city would be invited. Sandra called me into the small study and handed me a garment bag. "George," she said, "the banquet is very important, considering that you've just returned and aren't yet familiar with social occasions. For external introductions, we'll temporarily present you as a nephew of a longtime family friend staying with us. Can you accept that?" They feared my behavior might embarrass the Ito family, and perhaps feared that Makoto might lose the spotlight on his own stage. The system immediately objected. "Refuse. Reveal your identity at the banquet. Let everyone know the rightful heir has returned." I accepted the garment bag. Inside was a suit of extremely simple cut and conspicuously cheap texture, essentially the same style worn by the household staff. It was perfectly suited for blending into the background. "I accept completely," I replied without hesitation. The identity of a family friend's nephew is excellent. Low social pressure. No responsibility as host. More freedom to observe and learn. And I can focus on sampling the cuisine. By the way, will the banquet catering be outsourced or prepared by the in-house chef? Any signature dishes? Sandra's train of thought was derailed yet again. The lengthy speech she had prepared to console and persuade me was rendered entirely useless. She stared at me speechlessly. You only care about the food. One of the core functions of a social banquet is to provide catering services," I said matter-of-factly. "And as a visiting nephew, my primary task is to experience the service, behave appropriately, and avoid adding unnecessary burdens to the hosts. Clear role positioning improves overall event efficiency." Sandra looked at me for a long moment, as if reassessing something she could not quite articulate. Chapter 11. On the night of the banquet, the Ito residence garden and main hall shimmered with light and color. Makoto Ito wore a custom-made white suit. Every inch the refined young heir, elegant and handsome. Willow was dressed in an exclusive designer gown, like a fairy under moonlight, receiving an endless stream of compliments. With Willow's arm looped through Makoto's, the two appeared perfectly matched. As for me, I remained in the shadows between the terrace and the main hall, focused on a plate of exceptionally well-prepared chilled langoustines. The system lamented bitterly. "Host, look at them basking in attention, and you're just standing here eating. Where's your fighting spirit?" "Fighting spirit requires energy input," I replied calmly. "These langoustines are fresh and properly prepared, an excellent source of high-quality energy." I dipped one lightly in lemon juice, placed it in my mouth, and nodded in approval. At that moment, a female voice tinged with arrogance and thinly veiled mockery cut in. "Oh my, isn't this the nephew who took the money and disappeared? What's wrong? Did 3 million run out so quickly that you had to come here to replenish?" Willow approached with a glass of juice in hand, her face brimming with ridicule. I set down my napkin and looked up at her. "Miss Liu, good evening. The 3 million is currently appreciating in an orderly manner. Thank you for your concern." Willow choked slightly, then let out a cold snort. "I hear you're showing up tonight as some kind of distant nephew. What's the matter? Afraid to reveal your real identity? Afraid of embarrassing the Ito family?" The 2 socialites beside her let out soft giggles. I nodded. Yes, the Ito family maintains a rigorous standard. The threshold is naturally high. As someone newly arrived, participating under a lower-profile identity is a responsible approach toward the host family's reputation. On the other hand, Miss Liu, I've heard that Liu Group's project in the Southern District has encountered obstacles, that capital turnover is strained, and that Chairman Liu was recently hospitalized due to stress-related health issues. With your status as a wealthy heiress potentially at risk, yet you still have the leisure to attend banquets and socialize, your composure is admirable. Willow Liu's expression shifted abruptly. "Where did you hear such rumors? Stop spouting nonsense." "It's not nonsense," I said, shaking my head lightly. "I simply keep track of local business developments." I briefly angled my phone screen toward her. A financial news alert from minutes earlier was displayed. "See, just updated, core project obstruction, liquidity pressure, and the chairman stepping back temporarily for health reasons. Shouldn't you return to discuss matters with your family?" Almost simultaneously, Willow's phone vibrated. She glanced at the caller ID. Her face changed instantly. Without another word, she hurried away, abandoning the confrontation. The 2 friends who had accompanied her exchanged looks. When they turned back to me, their expressions carried a new layer of uncertainty. What kind of background does this person have? His words land like prophecy. Chapter 12. Makoto had been watching this direction out of the corner of his eye the entire time. Seeing Willow retreat after our exchange, he picked up 2 glasses of wine and walked toward me with a gentle smile. "Brother," he said warmly, I was busy entertaining guests earlier and may have neglected you. Please forgive me. Come, let's have a drink together. He handed one glass toward me, the corner of his lips lifting ever so slightly. I knew this scene well. The classic maneuver: spill liquid over his own head, smash the glass, then claim I had humiliated him, leaving me condemned by public opinion. The system shouted, grab it and pour it over yourself first. Beat magic with magic. Instead, I stepped back a few paces and waved my hand lightly. No need. I don't drink alcohol. It causes gastric discomfort and affects subsequent dining efficiency. Makoto's jaw tightened. He dropped the pretense. In one swift motion, he poured the wine over his own head. The glass shattered sharply against the floor. Immediately, he began to sway backward as if about to collapse. I had anticipated this version. I quickly caught his arm as if to steady him, while simultaneously hooking my foot behind his calf. Ah! In the next second, Makoto's knees buckled forward. He fell straight down, kneeling before me. The entire room's attention converged. Even the music seemed to pause for a beat. Makoto froze in shock for a moment. Then his face twisted into wounded indignation. Brother, why are you forcing me to kneel to you? I know you don't like me, but today is my birthday. Whispers spread among the guests like a rising tide. Who is that? How domineering, making young Master Ito kneel. I heard he's just staying here temporarily, from some rural place, they say. No wonder. Paul and Sandra rushed over, seeing the scene. The veins at Paul's temples throbbed. He raised his hand toward me. You insolent. My hand rose steadily and caught his wrist midair. In a calm tone, I said, Mr. Ito, I recommend conducting basic fact verification before taking action. From the breast pocket of my suit jacket, I removed a thumb-sized micro camera to document the banquet layout details for future reference. I was wearing a portable recorder. The interaction just now has been fully captured on video. It clearly shows that Makoto poured the wine himself and subsequently lost balance and fell. At most, I attempted to help him and failed to support him in time. Under the doctrine of necessity, my instinctive reaction to assist was aimed at preventing greater personal injury. It constitutes a good faith rescue, objectively consistent with how a reasonable person would respond. There is no basis for fault. I gently shook the small device. Would you like me to connect it to the projection system and replay the key segment on site, so that the misunderstanding may be clarified? Makoto's accusations died instantly. Still kneeling, his face drained of color, whether from humiliation or fear, it was hard to tell. Paul's arm remained suspended midair, unable to advance or retreat. I smiled faintly and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, even a temporary guest is entitled to basic dignity and reputation rights. Those who just voiced accusations, would you care to offer an apology for your misjudgment? Or shall we discuss the legal elements of defamation in a more formal setting? Silence. This was no unsophisticated country bumpkin. This was a walking archive of evidence and a portable legal advisor. Chapter 13. The birthday banquet ended in haste. Makoto became the newest topic of gossip within elite circles. Not only had he fallen publicly in disgrace, but his attempt to frame someone had been countered on the spot with video evidence. A heavy, oppressive atmosphere settled over the Ito residence. Late that night, there was a gentle knock on my door. Sandra entered. Her eyes were swollen and red. She had clearly been crying. She sat on the chair beside my bed and looked at me. I was reviewing materials on my tablet, parenthetically, an analytical report on consumption patterns among urban young adults living alone. End parenthesis. Her voice was hoarse as she spoke. George, do you hate us? Hate us for favoring him? Hate us for making you suffer? I set down my tablet, open parenthesis. On the screen was a report about the consumption patterns of young adults living alone in the city. Close parenthesis. MS. Sandra. Hatred is a high-energy negative emotion. It is detrimental to both physical health and rational decision-making. I harbor no hatred toward you, only cognition based on biological facts and legal relationships. Sandra pressed a hand to her chest, as if my answer made her feel even worse. She said, why do you always speak like you're presenting a report? We are your family, your father and mother. Why can't we be like a normal family? Even if you argued, shouted at us, at least we'd know you care. I let out a quiet sigh. Emotional expression within families is generally an effective method for maintaining relational bonds and fulfilling psychological needs. However, I have long established an independent system for emotional regulation and need fulfillment. Asking me to adopt another's expressive model is equivalent to assigning me unfamiliar, high emotional cost labor that requires reassessing the input-output ratio. Sandra froze. Tears lingered on her cheeks. She looked confused, almost helpless. Reassessing the input-output ratio. Allow me to illustrate. I handed her a tissue. Emotional expression styles vary by individual. My rational dominant mode may not be compatible with the emotionally interactive family environment you're accustomed to. To reduce systemic friction and improve overall harmony, once I complete my preliminary capital accumulation, I will seek a living environment more suited to my operating structure. Sandra panicked. Seek a more suited environment, she asked. You're my son. You're part of the Ito family. Where would you go? To a place, I replied evenly, where rules are clearer, interpersonal interactions are simpler, and one can obtain proportional returns primarily through ability and labor. In that moment, I saw genuine fear in Sandra's eyes. She finally began to understand, dimly, that she might be losing her biological son, not because of hatred, but because, in his evaluation, this place was neither economically rational nor operationally efficient. Chapter 14. Just as Mr. and Mrs. Ito were sinking into a state of cognitive dissonance, the Ito family's eldest daughter returned. Angelica, Makoto's older sister, was famously indulgent toward her younger brother. Financial News had even reported that last year she had diverted funds from her husband's company to buy Makoto a luxury car, which ultimately led to her divorce. The moment she arrived home and heard about Makoto's suffering, she stormed to my door, hands on hips, shouting, "George Ito, you despicable, shameless villain. How dare you scheme against Makoto like this?" Angelica was thin as a withered vine, her sharp features impossible to soften even under heavy makeup. Her eyes were bloodshot as she glared at me furiously. Before I could respond, she charged forward and swept several stacked books and notebooks off my desk, scattering them across the floor. The system yelled, "Hit back, slap her hard and see if she still dares to act crazy." I glanced calmly at the mess on the ground, took out my phone, opened the calculator app, and began pressing numbers. As I calculated, I spoke. Principles of Urban Economics. Hardcover, list price 98 yuan, depreciated value 70. Practical data analysis with disk, list price 128 yuan, disk scratched, depreciated value 90. Custom leather notebook, market price approximately 300, depreciated value 200. Time cost to reconstruct lost notes, calculated at my hourly rate, provisionally 500. Mental disturbance and emotional distress, discretionary 300. Miss Ito, total 1,460 yuan. QR code or cash? Angelica sneered sharply. Money, money, money. That's all you care about. Let me tell you something, in this house, I only recognize Makoto as my brother. You'd better know your place, or I have plenty of ways to make you disappear. I nodded and pressed the stop button on my phone's recording function. Understood. Threatening language, recorded for the file. Miss Ito, under public security regulations, threatening another person's personal safety may result in detention and fines. Would you prefer to settle privately now, or shall I contact my legal counsel? I paused for a moment before continuing. Open parenthesis. Although it is only temporary and virtual. Close parenthesis. Angelica froze, then lunged forward in fury to snatch my phone. You recorded that. I had anticipated escalation. With a swift motion, I pushed her backward onto the bed, rapidly wrapped her in the blanket layer by layer, then rolled and wedged her securely into the gap between mattress and frame. Compared to rope restraint, this was the most appropriate control method I had evaluated under current conditions. She shrieked, her voice piercing through the door. The household staff rushed over in alarm. Paul and Sandra followed close behind. They were greeted with the sight of Angelica immobilized inside the blanket, only her head exposed, utterly unable to move. Paul roared at me, "Have you lost your mind?" My hair was slightly disheveled, and Angelica's bite mark was still visible on my arm, yet my expression remained composed. "Dad," I said evenly, "elder sister just explicitly threatened to have someone harm me. I recorded it. Would you like to review the audio? I have not engaged in any unlawful conduct or behavior contrary to public morality. Why, then, should I be subjected to such threats? Has the Ito family already acquired privileges that place it above law and social order?" The implication was heavy. Paul's face darkened instantly. The Ito family business was in a critical expansion phase. Reputational risk was the last thing they could afford. Once freed, Angelica was sharply reprimanded by Paul and ordered back to her room to reflect. Angelica covered her cheek, open parenthesis. I hadn't actually hit her, but her momentum had clearly been crushed, close parenthesis, and stared at me in disbelief. I made a small hand gesture toward her, technically the OK sign, though it resembled a quiet declaration of victory. Threats and intimidation. I am thoroughly versed in both the criminal code and criminal procedure law. Chapter 15. Angelica was confined to the house, but she was clearly unwilling to accept defeat. A few days later, taking advantage of the house being momentarily empty, she lured me to the basement storage room under the pretense that father had something to tell me. The moment I stepped inside, she slammed the heavy door shut, locked it from the outside, and cut off the power supply. The storage room plunged into darkness. The air carried a faint smell of dust and old belongings, along with the subtle rustling of unidentified creatures moving somewhere in the shadows. From outside the door, she let out a shrill laugh. "George, feel obedient now. Let's see you act arrogant again. Reflect properly in there." When you finally come to your senses and are willing to apologize to Makoto, I'll let you out. Very fitting. If the Ito house was a prison, it naturally required a warden. The system immediately warned. Host. Environmental conditions are severe. Data shows prolonged confinement in a dark space significantly increases the probability of psychological breakdown. Break the door down now. The next second, I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight function. Light dispelled the darkness. Reflect. Apologize for what? I raised an eyebrow. Here, there were no disturbances. The temperature was tolerable. No Makoto's incessant chatter. No Sandra's sighs. It was, in fact, an excellent environment for focused work. I found a sturdy empty wooden crate, turned it into a makeshift stool, sat down, activated my phone's personal hotspot, and connected it to the tablet I carried with me, parenthetically, once again demonstrating the value of good habits. End parenthesis. Over the next several hours, I completed the first drafts of 2 remote consulting reports, progressed through an online course module, and optimized the allocation ratio of my investment portfolio. Efficiency was extremely high. Approximately 6 hours later, Paul returned home, realized I was missing, and pressed Angelica for answers. Only then was the storage room door unlocked. The door opened. Light flooded in. Angelica had expected to see me on the verge of mental collapse. Instead, she saw me staring at the tablet screen with a satisfied smile. Excellent, I murmured. This strategic adjustment was timely. The projected rate of return increases by another half percentage point. I saved the document, stretched my shoulders and neck, and looked toward the stunned faces at the doorway. Oh, everyone's here. Perfect. I'm a bit hungry. Is it dinner time? Angelica pointed at me as if she had seen a ghost. You're not scared. You don't feel terrified. Scared, terrified. I stood up and dusted off my trousers. In the past, when rushing project deadlines, spending over 30 consecutive hours in cramped temporary workstations was routine. Compared to that, this space is adequate, the ventilation acceptable, and the network connection stable. As long as there's electricity and internet, I can generate value. Sandra rushed forward. I subtly shifted aside as she reached for me, her eyes filled with tears. George, are you all right? Do you feel unwell anywhere? I held up my phone and tablet. I'm fine. The only issue is that the mobile signal here is slightly obstructed. Download speeds for large files were somewhat affected. If you plan to arrange similar cooling-off reflections in the future, I recommend selecting a room with better signal coverage. Angelica finally broke down. In her eyes, I was no longer a normal person, that I was a monster with no sense of fear. Chapter 16. After this series of incidents, the mental states of the Ito family members visibly deteriorated. Sandra, worn down by prolonged emotional turbulence, guilt, and anxiety, fell ill and was admitted to a private hospital. Angelica cried uncontrollably at her bedside, fumbling even when trying to feed her medicine. Paul and Makoto were equally at a loss, clumsy in handling even minor logistical matters. When I arrived at the hospital, I first asked Angelica to step aside. Heightened emotion will affect the patient's rest. Please moderate your volume, I said calmly. Then I proceeded efficiently, locating the nurse station, confirming the attending physician's whereabouts, reviewing the electronic medical records, discussing the case details with the doctor, arranging for a senior private caregiver, completing administrative procedures, and even confirming the billing and settlement process with hospital administration. The entire sequence unfolded with clear structure, like executing a standardized logistic support operation. When Sandra regained consciousness, she saw me using a folding knife to peel an apple for her. The peel was thin, even, and continuous. George, I placed the neatly sliced apple pieces on a small dish and handed it to her. The physician's assessment indicates autonomic nervous system dysfunction triggered by emotional stress, compounded by anxiety symptoms. You require rest and pharmacological adjustment. Hospital expenses have been prepaid through the family account. The caregiver has been secured, experienced, well-reviewed. Daily rate 900. Sandra looked at me, tears welling up again. George, you're the steady and reliable one. Makoto let out a cold laugh. Big brother only knows how to put on a show. Mom's been sick for days. It's sister who's been taking care of her. He can't even say a single comforting word. I folded away the knife. Comforting language constitutes emotional value and may assist psychological consolation, I replied evenly. However, recovery from illness primarily depends on medical intervention, nutritional support, and adequate rest. At this stage, ensuring procedural correctness, maintaining a restorative environment, and allocating resources efficiently are higher priorities. Paul looked at me, his gaze unusually complex. For the first time, he was forced to acknowledge that this son, overlooked, discordant, and perpetually out of sync, was, in practical matters, the most reliable and efficient person in the family. Yet that reliability carried a chill, an absolute rationality that unsettled him. Chapter 17. The scene of me taking care of Sandra in the hospital happened to be witnessed by Willow, who had come to visit. She saw me outside the doctor's office, discussing the post-recovery plan in fluent professional terminology, focused and methodical. In that moment, the composure and professionalism I displayed seemed to create a certain impact on her. Willow stopped me in the corridor, pressing her lips together. She said, "George Ito, I didn't expect you to have this side to you." I glanced at her and corrected, "Wong, call me George Wong." Then I asked, "Miss Liu, is there something you need? If this concerns the refund of the 3 million, that topic is non-negotiable." Willow let out a small scoff. "Who cares about that?" I meant, perhaps there were some misunderstandings between us before. For the first time, Willow found herself compared to Makoto's impulsiveness and occasional lack of composure. George's clarity of mind and steady execution carried a different kind of appeal. Perhaps a man like this was more dependable. The system spat indignantly. "Disgusting. The fickle X wants to crawl back. Host, crush her pride. Tell her you're not a recycling bin for emotional leftovers." I took a small step back, making my rejection unmistakable. "Miss Liu, the contract has been terminated and the consideration has been paid. To now raise the issue of misunderstanding constitutes an attempt to alter the terms of an already executed agreement. In commercial practice, that reflects a lack of integrity. Moreover, I have no interest in reacquiring a previously disposed emotional asset, even if it carries a temporary economic premium." Willow flushed with embarrassment and anger. "George, you really don't know what's good for you. What is good or bad is judged by your value system." I replied calmly, "My worth does not require your evaluation." I stepped past her and walked away without pause. Behind me, Makoto happened to exit the hospital room and witnessed the exchange. He saw the complicated look in Willow's eyes as she watched my retreating figure. The resentment in his gaze was almost tangible. Excellent. Internal contradictions had begun to shift. Chapter 18. As my presence within the Ito family continued to grow in a different way, open parenthesis, by rendering all of their emotional attacks ineffective, close parenthesis, the system began to malfunction. It realized that the preset underdog comeback storyline could no longer move forward at all. The so-called antagonists had not suppressed me. Instead, under my rational responses, they found themselves increasingly overwhelmed, their emotional management systems flashing red warnings one after another. The system pleaded, "Host, I beg you, could you at least display a trace of normal human emotion? The world line deviation has reached 95%. If this continues, the underlying narrative structure will require reconstruction." At the time, I was browsing real estate transaction platforms. My down payment had been secured. I was screening apartments that met my criteria. "System," I said evenly, "have you not yet recognized reality? The foundation of this world's operation is not the emotional drama you designed, but resource allocation and rational choice. As long as I possess sufficient capital and problem-solving capacity, narrative control rests in my hands." The system emitted a burst of static, then fell silent. Moments later, its tone shifted to something flatter and more stable. "Core logical framework of host confirmed stable. System compatibility adjustment in progress. Upgrading to rational operations assistance system." I allowed myself a faint smile. "Precisely. Timely strategic adjustment is the optimal solution." Chapter 19. Makoto could no longer restrain himself. He noticed that Willow had grown increasingly distant toward him, yet kept indirectly inquiring about me. So he resorted to what he considered his ultimate tactic. He drugged her, until Willow became pregnant. She believed their physical encounter had been nothing more than an alcohol-induced accident. With matters having escalated this far, and mindful of both families' reputations and public scrutiny, the wedding date was hastily finalized. During the wedding preparations, Makoto deliberately sought me out to boast. "Brother," he said smugly, "no matter how flawlessly you calculate, I'm the ultimate winner. Willow is carrying my child. I'm the true future heir of the Ito family." I was reviewing the finalized design blueprints of my new apartment. Looking at Makoto's triumphant expression, I found it absurd. "Congratulations," I said calmly, "wishing you a harmonious union and a lifetime partnership without dissolution." He frowned. "You're not upset? Not even a little? You don't hate me at all?" I smiled. "Why would I hate someone who has taken over a problematic contract?" I replied. "A reminder. By the way, drugging someone constitutes a criminal offense. Recording it and circulating the footage for self-congratulation differs little from voluntarily submitting evidence." Makoto's complexion changed instantly. You're slandering me." I shrugged lightly. "Whether it is slander or not, time will clarify," I said, rolling up the blueprints. "In any case, it is no longer my concern. I move out tomorrow. The ethical drama you have so carefully staged, I will not be making further cameo appearances." Chapter 20. On the day I moved out of the Ito residence, the entire family stood at the gate. Sandra wept openly. "George, must you really leave? The house has everything." "A mess, Sandra," I replied evenly. "Appropriate spatial distance can improve relational quality." I gave her a polite, Brief embrace. In the future, I will visit periodically as a guest, bringing gifts and observing proper social etiquette. Paul Ito handed me a thick envelope. There's some cash inside. Living alone outside. You should have emergency funds. I did not refuse. I accepted it. Thank you, Mr. Ito. I will categorize this amount as an unrestricted personal gift, or alternatively allocate it toward a pre-deposited portion of your future support fund. I will send you detailed accounting statements periodically. Angelica stood awkwardly to the side, letting out a reluctant snort. Idiot brother. If you run into trouble out there, you can call home. No need, I replied calmly. My phone contains direct numbers for the police station, fire department, emergency medical services, and the Consumer Protection Bureau. Their response efficiency is more reliable. I pulled my modest suitcase and stepped through the ornate iron gates of the Ito estate. The sunlight was excellent. The air carried the scent of freedom. The system chimed pleasantly in my mind. Notification. Host has achieved a stage milestone. Issuing rational decision reward, 5 million yuan. Funds have been transferred to the designated account. I turned back for one final look at the exquisite residence, beautiful, yet filled with invisible restraints. Farewell to the confusion of true and false heir identities. From this day forward, I am George, an independent individual with my own property, stable cash flow, a well-structured emotional management system, and a coherent logical framework. As for Makoto and Willow, it is said that on the wedding day, Willow received, anonymously, the very video Makoto had circulated within his group chats. She immediately reported it to the authorities. Law enforcement arrived at the venue and escorted a triumphant Makoto away on the spot. The Ito and Liu families fell out completely, cooperative ventures collapsed, and both sides suffered reputational consequences within the industry. But those developments belong to side stories that no longer concern me. After all, in my contact list, they have already been categorized under no further interaction required. That is entirely reasonable. Low efficiency, or worse, negative yield, relationships are best liquidated promptly.